Stimați colegi, bună ziua! Eu sunt Vyacheslav Balan, coordonator național al Oficiului ONU pentru Drepturile Omului în Republica Moldova și vă mulțumim pentru că ați găsit timp să veniți la această conferință de presă. Deci organizăm această conferință de presă cu ocazie finalizării misiunii domnului Michel Forst, care este raportor special al Organizației Națiunilor Unite pe situația apărătorilor drepturilor omului. Domnul Forst s-a aflat cu o vizită de o săptămână în Republica Moldova. Domnul va povesti un pic despre acelea întrevederi, ședințe la care a participat și va prezenta constatările preliminare de pe urma acestei vizite. Deci, pe parcursul conferinței de presă veți primi la mână inclusiv și comunicat de presă în limba română. Însă versiunile în limba română, deci sunt versiuni pre-editate, adică care încă urmează a fi editate din punct de vedere a limbii române, și respectiv versiunile autentice, deci versiunile de la care urmează să preluați informația așa, în primă instanță, sunt versiunile în limba engleză. Deci noi vom plasa versiunea comunicatului de presă și a documentului mai lung care conține constatările preliminare pe site-ul Organizației Națiunilor Unite în cel mai scurt timp, în limba română și engleză și rusă și respectiv veți putea să preluați deja versiunile oficiale de pe acest site. Deci, acestea fiind spuse, eu acum îi dau cuvântul domnului Forst, deci o să aveți ocazie după prezentarea dumnealui să adresați întrebări, am să vă rog să ridicați mâna și eu am să vă ofer cuvântul în ordinea ridicării mâinii. Deci, acum vă rog domnul Michel Forst.
Okay, thank you for the floor. Sorry not to be able to speak in Russian or in Romanian, but I guess you have simultaneous interpretation that will allow you to understand the main elements of this report. What I wanted to do is, like after all missions, to share with you the first findings of this mission that we share this morning with the Minister of Foreign Affairs himself, and then with all ministries and state institutions that I've met during the course of my mission. This is, I always say, the first assessment, the first finding, with a set of recommendations addressed to different institutions as well as to the international community. And the full version of the report will be then available in a couple of weeks and will be presented in March 2019 at one of the sessions of the UN Human Rights Council, because my mandate reports both to the Council, Geneva, but also to the General Assembly in New York. So I now need to receive additional information, some material coming from different ministries, institutions, but also from defenders, and then to digest all the information to prepare the full report. And I would like to commend the government of Moldova for this invitation. That gives me the possibility to assess the global situation of defenders in the country. The mission has been conducted in a spirit of good cooperation with the state, good cooperation with all institutions that I've met, but also I must say with a large number of meetings with different defenders I had the possibility to meet here during the course of this mission. I also had the possibility to travel to Tiraspol, where I also met with the de facto authority to discuss with them some of the findings, but also discuss with them some of my recommendations, and those recommendations will also be included and will be part of my report. We also had a very good meeting with NGOs operating in the region of Tiraspol, in which they also shared with me some concerns on how they do operate in the region of Tiraspol. That's also interesting to note in my report. The global purpose of this mission was to assess, like I do in all my country missions, against a set of criteria, the situation of defenders in Moldova. And of course, Moldova is not Mexico. Mexico is not Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan is not France, and all countries have a different situation. But the threats and attacks against defenders may take the different forms, but the idea is to assess against the same series of criteria, so that I would be consistent when doing an assessment of the situation of defenders in Moldova, like in other countries. I must say that The main findings will be reported, and you'll find them in the end of mission statement. I don't want to be too long, but the idea was to assess the legal framework. Does it provide a safe and enabling environment for defenders? And the response is globally yes. There is a way for improvement in the legal system. Maybe we'll come back to some ideas, some thoughts, some recommendations. Do defense feel safe as the operator? That's more complicated. And I must say that from what I heard from the voices of defenders, from their part, they say that the situation has worsened in the country. But I'm not able to compare against anything because that's my first visit in the country. But what they say is that the situation has worsened. I would say that for my part, there is way for improvement in all areas in Moldova, but also in Tiraspol. You know, we have at the UN a very broad definition of human rights defenders, and that's something that I had to recall at many occasions when meeting with the government, but also with de facto authorities in Tiraspol, to recall that defenders are not only people working in organizations, which is something that many people think. In fact, we have at the UN a very broad definition, and we need to keep this definition alive. In fact, it covers a wide range of activities, covers also the activities of journalists, whistleblowers, lawyers, judges, attorneys, but also simple citizens that are trying to promote the rights and to protect the rights of minorities, for instance, of different rights. And that's important to keep this very broad definition of defenders. I must also note that this mission took place in a context which is quite complicated with the annulation of the election in Chisinau. And I must say that this decision triggered some discussions with the lawyers, but also with the defenders. And it was raised at many occasions during individual meetings with defenders, also with a discussion with the journalists. And I must say that from their part, they expressed serious concerns about the danger this decision may represent for the celebration of a truly democratic elections in the country to come. And I would like to share with you my deep concern on this decision, which goes against the will of the population and represent for me a step back in terms of democratic institutions. I had the possibility to look also at the demonstration by lawyers, which I must say were conducted in a peaceful manner, with no force, excessive use of force by the police. And as again, I would say that the global framework of the situation in Moldova needs improvement in the Republic of Moldova. Human rights defenders and journalists are, at some occasions, victims of stigmatization campaign. And that's something that I noted this morning when discussing with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, asking him to convey the message to his colleagues that when public officials, members of parliament, ministers, and sometimes the head of states launch these campaigns to vilify the work of defense or to defame the work of defenders, that's something that has an impact on the situation of defenders. And I called this morning the Minister of Foreign Affairs to request from the Prime Minister a strong statement showing that defenders are a positive asset for the countries and that defenders are in Moldova agents of change and not enemies of the states, like many would like the population to think. I've been struck also by the fact that lawyers and attorneys are facing sometimes difficult situations. They are facing sometimes politically motivated charges or sometimes are threatened whenever they defend dissenting voices. And again, journalists sometimes experience limitations in access to information. And the national institutions, the two national institutions, the Ombudsman's office and the other institution, feel in fact well disregarded, in fact, when they present their findings and their recommendations. In the meeting I had with the de facto authorities in Tiraspol, I also alerted the authorities on the law on non-profit organizations, which contained for me a dangerous provision, which is the lack of definition of political activities. While you know with me that the work of human rights defenders, the work of NGOs, is to do advocacy. And by nature, advocacy is political. You cannot defend the right of Roma, you cannot defend the right of women, you cannot defend the right of children if you don't advocate for a better framework, a better legislation. So political activities, that's an issue for me which is complicated, and I raised with the authorities the use of this dangerous item. I was also informed by some defenders operating in the region of Tiraspol that sometimes were called for discussions by the KGB, or you say not KGB, but MGB. And of course, the government told me that they may refuse to respond to those invitations, but you know with me that it's quite complicated to refuse such an invitation, and it might have an impact. So I draw the attention of the authorities on this type of practice. In practice, it's worrying for me to see that on one hand, the government of Moldova is very supportive of defenders on the international arena. They are very supportive to UN resolution, speaking of defenders. And lastly, this week there was a strong statement by France and 44 countries, and Moldova was amongst the 44 countries, calling for a better protection for defenders. So that's happening at the international arena in Geneva. Same in New York, when a strong landmark resolution has been adopted in November. Moldova was behind the resolution, but when you look at domestic level, there might be some discrepancies between the voice of Moldova outside of the country and what's happening in the country. So they just need to have more consistency between the two positions of Moldova in the international arena and also at domestic level. In my statement, you will also find some developments on the law on non-profit organizations in Moldova, which is globally satisfactory, and I heard from defenders themselves that they find that law is satisfactory. Nonetheless, some of them draw my attention to the fact that the law has been adopted in the first lecture by the Parliament, and there will be a second lecture, and I'm a little bit worried to see that amendments may be presented at the Parliament that would be a sort of step back of the law, notably with the issue of access to foreign funding, which is sometimes an element that parliaments or politicians want to introduce to narrow access to funding for defenders, and that I draw the attention of the government on this aspect. I'm pleased to see that the National Action Plan on Human Rights represent a good input for me with the consolidation of all recommendations coming from the UPR, also from treaty bodies in one single document. I do regret, nonetheless, that some provisions coming from the last examination of Moldova by the Committee Against Torture were not, were in fact deleted by an amendment by the Parliament on this National Action Plan, while for me that's important that all concluding observations from treaty bodies should be incorporated in this action plan. I've noted also the idea to have a sort of by the Prime Minister coordination mechanism by which the action plan will be also implemented. You will find in my report also some element on the fight against corruption. Corruption was like a motto that I heard at many occasions during my discussions with defendants, with lawyers, and with judges. I don't want to comment on this. You will find in my statement some elements for you to better understand them. One of the elements for me of a safe and enabling environment are the institutions of France. And amongst the institutions that are able to protect defenders, you have the Ombudsman. And in my meeting with the Ombudsman, I must say that I've been struck by the understaffing, the underfunding of the institution of the Ombudsman. And I was impressed also by the premises of the Ombudsman, which are not, at the level required, especially when it comes to people with disabilities who don't have access to the building. And in my report, there is a set of recommendations on how to improve the staffing, the budget, but the efficiency also of the Ombudsman. The Ombudsman has been recently accredited with an A status by the UN in November. Nonetheless, in the report of the UN, there is a set of concrete recommendations that need to be look carefully, both by the government but also by the institution itself, to improve the effectiveness of this institution. The second institution for me is the Equality Council, which has a broad mandate to examine cases of discrimination in Moldova. But the problem is that they cannot impose sanctions, and that's something that we need to note. And similarly, what I said to the Ombudsman's office, the issue of funding, the issue of staffing is something that I noted in my report, and I requested the state of Moldova to look at how to improve the staffing and the budget of these two institutions. And then you will find in my report also what we call groups at risk. There are categories of defenders that need and deserve a better protection, and of course lawyers and attorneys are amongst the categories. I've been really concerned by allegations received by some lawyers regarding unfounded allegations of or spurious crimes faced by lawyers defending opposition figures or dissenting voices. And sometimes they are called to warn them not to take clients because of those dissenting voices that they would represent. Same with judges. We had a number of cases of judges also told us that in fact they were receiving also phone calls and information, were also advised not to go into detail when investigating on some political cases. As you are also journalists, you will find in my statement a good paragraph on the case of journalists, and especially of those who are investigative journalists, who told me that they are victims of, again, large campaigns of defamation using the social media, defamation campaigns, which is for me something which is not acceptable. And access to information was also an element of the discussion with journalists. And to my understanding, I would say that the law on access to information should probably is outdated and should be revisited against international standards. Defenders of LGBTIs are part of my assessment. I must say that I noted with satisfaction that the last Gay Pride happened without any incident, while at the same time I'm also worried to see that there are some homophobic statements and attitude in the society, including hate speech, and I'm concerned to see that there is no provision in the legislation to address hate crimes and hate speech, and that's one of my recommendations, to look also at how to improve the hate speech and crime in the legislation. We discussed with Roma mediators, and you will find also a small paragraph on the fact that they are not recognized, not well financially supported, and there is a need to also to look at how to improve the training curricula for them. They also mentioned the fact that Roma women were amongst the most discriminated. And also, they will find also the last chapter dedicated to the role of the international community. Of course, they don't have to interfere into domestic affairs, but at the same time, the international community has a role to play to advise the government and sometimes to draw the attention during the political dialogue on human rights on some cases and situations. And I know that in the EU dialogue, they raise concerns on cases, they name cases, they name names with authorities, asking them to also look at those cases. That's something that is also the role of the international community. You may recall that when it comes to the Universal Periodic Review in Geneva, that's the responsibility of state to also send communications, send recommendations to other states in order to improve the situation of human rights in the country. But I must say that discussing with NGOs and with defenders, many of them told me that they don't have a large access to funding, and that's something that I recommend also to the EU and other embassies to look at on access to funding and not always fund the same organizations. Sometimes you have good small organizations that want to be established, and if they don't have the funding to establish their organization, then they cannot last for long, while we need to establish strong organizations to make sure that defenders are alive. I must say again to conclude my first statement that again to stress this discrepancy between the voice of Moldova at international level and at domestic level, and during my discussion with the ministers and with the institution, I expressed my deep commitment to support strengthening the rule of law, strengthening protection of defenders in Moldova. My mandate has mainly established not only to denounce violations, but also to provide technical assistance to the government, and together with my colleagues, Special Rapporteurs, we could be of use to help Moldova to improve the situation of defenders. I also recalled in my discussion with the minister this morning that we celebrate this year the 20th anniversary of the UN Declaration on Human Rights Defenders, and Moldova has been behind this 20th anniversary, and it would be good if we could have in the days to come a strong statement of the Prime Minister recognizing the positive role played by defenders. That would be a way to also combat the current narrative on defenders, which is depict them as I told you, as enemies of the country or as anti-development. I've been also informed that Moldova will be a candidate to be elected as a member of the Human Rights Council in Geneva in the years to come, and I invited the Minister of Foreign Affairs, but also the Prime Minister, to look at having in their candidacy some voluntary pledges showing the strong support and interest of the government of Moldova to support and protect defenders. Thank you very much.
Domnul Forst, deci un pic informații suplimentare la ceea ce a prezentat domnul și am să ofer posibilitatea să puneți întrebări. Deci raportorii speciali sau proceduri speciale în cadrul sistemului ONU sunt niște experți independenți în diferite domenii ale drepturilor omului, care sunt aleși pentru a exercita mandatul său în capacitatea lor individuală ca și independentă. Deci raportorii speciali nu se supun niciunui organ a Organizației Națiunilor Unite, nici oficiului ONU pentru drepturile omului și respectiv în virtutea acestui mandat independent au posibilitatea să oferă o retrospectivă sau o viziune independentă asupra situației, în cazul nostru, cu apărătorii drepturilor omului în Republica Moldova. Deci, respectiv, acum, dacă doriți să adresați întrebări, este timpul pentru întrebări. La microfon, mă rog.
Aș vrea să vă spune domnul Forst ce părere are despre rezoluția ONU privind retragerea trupelor străine din stânga.
I don't hear the...
Poate să vorbiți la acest microfon, nu?
Trebuie să-l
Oh,
conectăm.
you have on the table you have your own.
Svetlana Gore, TVR Moldova, dacă ne puteți spune care este părerea dumneavoastră privind rezoluția ONU de retragere a trupelor străine din stânga Nistrului și dacă acesta este un pas înainte pentru respectarea drepturilor omului pe ambele maluri și cum se vede această hotărâre la nivel internațional?
Well, as you know, my mandate is focusing on the situation of defenders, and we have other rapporteurs dealing with other issues, and that's an issue that I cannot comment today in front of you. My mandate was very much focusing on the situation of defenders.
Care ar fi, aș vrea să aud mai multe detalii despre situația apărătorilor în regiunea transnistreană, pentru că a menționat dumnealui că ei sunt văzuți doar un amendament care este destul de periculos în lege, dar mai mult de atât, pe teren, la modul practic, cum se descurcă apărătorii și ce soluții ar fi, ce recomandări ar da ambelor, cum ar să zic eu, autorităților și de aici și celor nerecunoscute.
Of course, according to UN standards, the main responsibility to protect defenders lies with the state, meaning the state of Moldova. But they don't have an access to some part of the country. That's why in my discussion with the de facto authorities in Tiraspol, I also wanted to draw their attention to key elements that I mentioned before in front of you, like the law on non-profit organizations, which is not compliant with international standards. And also alert them on the fact that although they are not part of international treaties and instruments, they have decided to adhere to the main provisions of those international instruments. And if the law is not in line with the main provisions of those international standards, then there's need for them to change. I also explained to you that discussing with defenders from Tiraspol, or operating Tiraspol, and sometimes coming from Chisinau, they told me that it's sometimes often difficult to operate in Tiraspol. I, as an example, explained to you that being called by the KGB,
Ministry, MGB.
MGB for conversation, that's a way to put pressure on them, and that's something which is not acceptable, which is a form of harassment by public authorities. And again, I draw the attention of the authorities of Tiraspol on this element, and that will be part of my full report. I'm expecting to receive additional information from Tiraspol to put in my report, and then to be able to provide with additional comments, also recommendations, both to Chisinau and Tiraspol, on how to improve the situation of defenders operating in Tiraspol.
Aș vrea să ne spuneți care sunt principalele recomandări aduse guvernului și să ne spuneți eventualele riscuri în îndeplinirea acestor recomandări, dacă ele există.
I don't understand could you repeat the question?
Your key recommendations and what are the risks of not implementing your recommendations?
Okay. That's a question that they raised with the UN on recommendations. They are not, in fact, binding. It's like the recommendation coming from treaty bodies, like recommendation coming from the state during the UPR, the Universal Periodic Review. They are sending recommendations to the government, asking them to implement and to deliver more of the recommendations. But there is no way to enforce those recommendations. That's a way to show to the government that there are improvements to be made, ways to improve the compliance of the government with the main provisions of international treaties, and then by discussing with them, by providing technical assistance, then you can progressively improve the way the government implements the main provisions and the main recommendations coming from us, special rapporteurs, and from the treaty bodies. But again, there is no way to enforce those decisions. It's only by conviction, by telling the truth, that sometimes you get an adherence from some of them, and then you see that there are positive developments in countries. And for my part, traveling a lot, doing a lot of missions in countries in which defenders are facing more risks than in Moldova, like killings, abductions, disappearances, like in Mexico, Honduras, and Guatemala. I see that on some occasions my recommendations are implemented and then improving the situation of defenders. That's my hope when discussing with the authorities in Moldova. And in my discussion with the minister, I told him that one of my way to look at how they implement is to come back to Moldova in a couple of months and then to again meet with the authorities and institutions to tell them, what have you done with my recommendation? Have you implemented some of them? And if there are some difficulties, to provide technical assistance to implement some of my recommendations. If there are no other questions, then we'd like to thank you for this discussion, and you will receive not only the press statement, but also the end of mission statement, which is currently being translated from English into the two languages. But of course, for the UN, the English version is my version, and of course, the two other versions are the interpretation into the languages.
Da, deci vă mulțumim și acum deja aveți pe masă comunicatul în limba rusă și în limba română într-un minut, două să fie adus aici, așa că dacă ați putea un minut, două să vă rețineți, să obțineți și limba română. Deci e vorba, deci noi acum avem la dispoziție două documente. Acest comunicat foarte scurt, care o să-l aveți acum, și mai este o declarație mai lungă, un document de aproximativ 10 pagini, care conține mai multe detalii privitor la acele aspecte asupra cărora s-a expus domnul Forst numai ce. Deci noi vom plasa acest document în toate trei limbi, cum și acest document, pe site-ul nostru, site-ul Organizației Națiunilor Unite în Republica Moldova, și în varianta imprimată, la fel o să puteți să obțineți în foarte scurt timp, dacă vă mai rețineți 5-10 minute, o să obțineți celălalt document imprimat. Vă mulțumim pentru participare și așteptăm materiale bune despre vizita domnului raportor special.
Thank you.